buy products, look for information online, you search on Google, you interact with the website, you like the content, you download something, you buy something, and you have great experience. But you have to know that behind all those top results and all the great content, you have guys like those guys, right? You have very smart people who are slicing the data, you are within the persona, you're being tracked, you're being retargeted to. There's all a lot of strategy behind it, right? So my question is, how would you describe the difference between content marketing and content strategy? The same thing, different things?
Content marketing is just marketing, but we just use the term content now because people care about it and it's a buzzword. It's a part of the content strategy cycle, right? It's the marketing part of the content strategy cycle. So we have, measuring the content, planning for the content, looking at the audience, creating the content, releasing the content, and then marketing it. So, this is sort of how we promote it and how we get it out to people. It's just a part of content strategy.
Yeah, and people think they're the same thing, but content marketing doesn't inherently mean content strategy, but it should. So, a lot of people will just make a piece of content and then they'll throw it out there and hope it does something. Whereas if you have an actual strategy involved, then you can plan where that content's going to live, who's going to own it, how are you going to put it out there, how are you going to maintain it. So really, content marketing is a late stage result of content strategy, like Devin was saying.
And just to add to it, from my perspective, great content, it costs a lot of money. You just have to spend, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you have to really make a big and great case to clients to make it happen. But I also feel like you guys tell me what you think. With the client, is always one big, 2, 3 big content pushes a year, and then everything goes down, and there's nothing going on. So with content strategy, what you want to do is you want to create a repeatable and scalable process, right? It's like a heartbeat. So you want every day, you want to promote the conversation on social media, you want blog posts or video on YouTube, but you need to do it in a scalable and repeatable manner. So that's why you need the content strategy behind that. So you plan ahead, you plan your content calendar 6 months ahead. It's not 2, 3 big content campaigns and then you do nothing. That will not get you your SEO going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you were saying, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And if most people that do content marketing, their analytics go like this, and this is 3 years, then this. So, most people give up here rather than here where you're supposed to, you're finally going to reap the benefits. And what you said about the content calendar is really important because you have to commit to what you can scalably do, and you will continue to do over time. So if you're yeah, we want to do infographics, and then you do 2 or 3, and you're oh, it's not really going anywhere, and then you stop doing content altogether, then you're never going to see the content marketing rewards. But if you continue, even if it's doing 2 blog posts a week, and you just stay on that for months, then you're definitely going to see the reward. And if you can't do that, then stick to paid search or display ads or something.
One of the big questions is also to think about, you want a lot of content and you want it all to be good, but you have to ask yourself, how often can you make content that's good? Mm-hmm. Not just how often can you make content, because it's great to have a blog that's updated every day, but if it's no good and you're expending all of your resources just trying to do that, it's not going to be as successful as maybe 1 to 2 good blog posts a week that people know and can count on, and that you can actually take that energy that you would have been using to create more crappy content into creating 1 or 2 things and then promoting the hell out of it for the rest of the week.
Questions from the audience?
How will you differentiate between a share-worthy and a link-worthy content?
Well, I think share-worthy is something that's going to be a little bit more specifically targeted to the social networks that you care most about, because depending on the product that you're advertising, not all social networks are created equal. If you're doing a lot of stuff with micro content, for instance, Twitter's huge. And if you're doing more tech-related things, even though the volume's not there, you're going to get more people who are interested in Google+. So that's more of a consideration where link-worthy is a much sort of broader thought, is this content good? Are people going to be interested in it? And can we actually get people sort of coming in rather than sort of spreading out?
Next question?
For Devin, you said that you know, you want to make sure you want to guide the users through your website.
Right.
What's the best way to guide that person? You know, like what's keeping them from clicking anywhere else in the navigation bar and going away from your ideal funnel?
I think the idea is you want to create a situation where the user can go where they want to go, right? So that the information that they want is presented to them, and that all comes down to sort of the planning that you do before you implement that content and figuring out, you know that this consumer, like I was saying earlier, is not just interested in buying right away. Like they are going to research and they want to know, for instance, you'll know a lot of consumers just really want to see a list of priced items, right? When you're dealing with e-com, and if you can give them that, you know that they're going to respond to that. That's what you'll give them. But it's really a matter of knowing in advance before you do the content what target consumer are you going after? Who's going to make you the most money, and who's most likely to interact with your content and be directed towards your product?
Yeah, and it really just goes back to like giving them what they want and how they expect it. So think about like sites that are actively pushing you through a funnel. Sites like Amazon, they make it clear that like here is the information, here is your next step, so on and so forth. Or sites where like it's a landing page where it says step 1, step 2, step 3. Or if it's a guide of some sort, it's like, and then on the right side there'll be some sort of navigation that says, here's how you learn about this, here's how you learn about this. And then it's drawing you further into the funnel, both visually and from a content standpoint. So really you just have to figure out what is it that the people want and how can you make it clear that these are the steps to take to get it.
We talked today that content is king, right? But usability is really the queen. So you have to think about when you build websites, you bring SEOs, you bring content strategies, but you also need a UX person. You also need to, and maybe Norris is going to jump in on that. But you have to learn, from data. Where they go, bouncing back, how many pages they use and stuff like that. So that's important too.
Yeah, like certain audiences, like you could target an audience for a particular piece of content or just the website flow itself. But you always got to take into account there's going to be a portion of that audience that comes to the site that's just going to see what they want really quickly and just leave. And you have to account for the people that's going to come to your site and just want to just consume information like by the boatloads. So if your site is wellly presented to them, you can capture everybody under the sun. But you have to realize that you might capture people for a second, you might capture people for 3 minutes. But it just depends on how you want to target that particular persona in this case, or that particular segment of the audience. And how you target them is with data. You have to actually see exactly, okay, this is what my site is. This is what we want to target for this person. This is where we're going to place it at. This is where we're going to see our drop off for this particular person. It's okay, we don't mind that because we're going to catch everybody else after the fact. So you just have to make sure that whatever you're doing as far as the site layout is concerned, that it's driven with the audience in mind to a large degree, not just in the sense of who's going to buy something from my site, it's in the sense who's coming to the site and how we might not capture them today, but we'll catch them later down the line. So it's a give and take, sort of speaking, the conversation for the give and the take.
And one of the things, like Mike was talking about, sort of expectation, that's where your metadata comes in. When the user searches, the first thing they encounter is their title and the description. You don't want to just oversell something just to get the click, and then they get to the site, and that's not really what they wanted, or that's not what you let them, believe they were going to get. So sort of being very honest in a convincing way, and getting the user that, it's not just about getting to the site, but sort of getting a qualified one that actually wants to be there and knows what they're getting.
How do you do infographic? Is there a tool that you use?
Yeah, there are some tools. There's one called Pictochart, that's spelled with a K, P-I-K-T-O chart. There's Infogram, visually. And they're all like drag and drop WYSIWYG tools for building infographics. I mean, if you know anything about Photoshop, that's where you should really make it. But yeah, there's a ton of tools out there. There's a bunch of You don't even have to go with just infographics. There's a lot of tools. There's a tool called Storybird for making like online books, and they're like flip book type things that they're like children's books kind of. You can use like a timeline, just anything that you can think of that's cool. Make that.
And the execution, building an infographic, you don't need, it's not a rocket science, right? But it's the idea, it's providing something new, providing something that people really, want to engage with. And when it comes to, it's usually it's a data visualization. So when you think about it, think about maybe 5-6 points you want to make, and don't overkill it, don't overdo it. Once you put too much cloud on the infographic, it's gonna be not a good infographic.
Yeah, it should tell one very focused story.
Yeah.
Essentially making one point with a few sort of branches off of it. But sometimes it's like they want to cover everything under the sun, and it just it doesn't resonate.
And I like what Norris said, that the male demographic and the personas that are when we target male demographic. I mean, I like infographics. I'm visually driven, kind of like yourself, Norris.
Yeah.
I'm not like Mike. I don't want to read 200 pages of text.
Y'all both play a lot of video games.
We do like it.
So I have a presentation on my SlideShare. It's all about like tools and stuff. It has about 50 different free tools that you can use. Some are like for collecting data, some are for building infographics, things of that nature. So you might find that worthwhile. But yeah, for getting data for infographics, SurveyMonkey is really awesome. We actually just did a series of 3 infographics with their data. So you can get the exact type of stuff that you want. And then there's like the world government data source where you can get a bunch of stuff, census data. The experience stuff is also really useful, the links that we showed you. And there's a ton of stuff in those decks, so check that out.
Thanks, Maria.
Yes, you mentioned that usually you're brought by the client like 5 minutes before whatever the company launches. But also, I mean, I just want to know when is the right moment, because I feel that in the beginning, let's say when you're building a site, like first you want to figure it out as a brand or as an agency what to put in there, right? So maybe I feel that it's not like the right moment, but maybe once it's before, it's too late.
It actually is the right moment, because let's say for example they have ideas. So typically what happens is when they're building a site, they have a strategy brief that they put together. They hand that off to us, and then the creative team puts together a creative brief. So at that point, they generally have an idea of what it's going to be, and then the creative people, well, it depends what team the content strategist is on, because sometimes they're on creative, sometimes they're on strategy, and they figure out what's going to be on this site. So that's probably the best point to bring in SEO, when they're figuring out that concept, because as soon as they have an idea, they're going to start saying, okay, this page is going to be this, so on and so forth, and then we can start looking at keywords and looking at the opportunity and stuff. So we won't necessarily be building things at that point, but we can help make sure the strategy is the right way.
And branding that's informed by search is really great, because when you're figuring out who you want to be, it really helps to figure out who your customers want you to be. Like, what are they looking for? Because if you can be what they're looking for, that really helps you become a brand that resonates. So having search involved really early on in the process is great for sort of figuring out your identity.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like built-in traffic if you do it that way. So the way I've always explained it, like when I worked at creative agencies, I'm like, you guys are building really beautiful cars with no engine, and then pushing them up hills with paid media. They turn off paid media, and they roll back down and crash. Now, if you use SEO as the engine, then you'll have a car that keeps going.
So just to follow that, once you have a website, like you have a website, and how hard is really to now try to optimize it once you have it done? Like, do you really need to pull it apart?
If you only have like 2 or 3 people working on the site, yeah, sure, it's easy. But when you have these committees that keep fighting about every different keyword and every piece of copy, and no, we don't want to put budget into this, that, and the third, then it's hard.
Yeah, I would also say that, once decisions are being made as far as, the budget and the type of technologies and platforms you want to use, so there's a design stage, right? You want to influence those. So let's say that we're building a blog, and the blog is built on a blogging platform that is not good for SEO. So we obviously want to, push WordPress at that stage. If in a design phase, let's say, there's a lot of great imagery and there's beautiful storytelling about the brand, but it's not built in responsive design, why are you doing it that way? So, if those voices are being heard, those decisions are being made, and you're like, okay, well, hey, Mike, optimize the blog, and I'm like, I cannot do anything on the platform, why didn't you do it on WordPress?
Right.
So then you have that aspect, then there's a site build, so that's the technical SEO. So you have to make sure that, you look at the sitemap and you start mapping keywords and titles and stuff like that. So I would say, as early as possible, and sometimes it doesn't require SEO to sit in every meeting and building, 100 different tags. I think in the industry is just way too much of it,
Yeah.
But just ask me the right questions. So our job, I think, is to kind of educate on the process and making sure that, sometimes it takes 5 seconds. It's just like, wow, it's not responsive design, it's not HTML5, like why is it not, why didn't you choose that technology over the other one?
Yeah, when you have a good developer that you're working with and you say those things, they're like, oh yeah, that's easy, we can fix that real quickly. But then you typically come up against developers that are just like, it works, I don't care about SEO.
Right.
So it's hard to get them to change the idea when they've already built something that works for the goals that the client gave them. Like, does it get users on the site? Can they sign in with Facebook? Like, can they do all those really simple things? But they don't care if they didn't account for old URLs. They don't care if there's no paid meta description and things of that nature. So your job as an SEO is very much like the checks and balances for websites, basically. And nobody wants their work to be checked, basically.
Another question from Lance?
So as SEO experts, with the recent eBay article, how do you feel? Do you think it's a good thing for SEO? Do you think it's going to hurt SEO, hurt search altogether?
So I don't know if you guys are all familiar, but eBay basically came out and said that paid search wasn't working.
Yeah.
I don't think that means much for SEO, because most people that would care are already doing SEO, and the people that cared more about paid search weren't going to do SEO. So I don't know how much that changes like the conversation for large brands, because they'll probably just put more money into social or something like that, because they get paid media. Like, okay, I put in $1, I get 50 cents back, or however it works. But when it comes to SEO, there's just too many moving parts. Like, you have to be aware of an algorithm, you have to build links, you have to make changes to your site. Whereas paid media is like, okay, we paid money and now stuff happens. So that's not gonna make SEO a bigger channel now.
And in the study that we just did with SearchMonkey, we found, we just found that 50% of people cannot tell the difference between a paid search ad and a search result. So,
And that's by design from Google, because for them, they make their money from paid search ads. That's why you see that they're continuing to change that background color. It used to be like a really clear, like pinkish. Now it's like, I can barely tell when it's a paid ad. So they're gonna continue to do stuff like that. And you're seeing that they're pushing organic search further below the fold. Like, some searches, they have all types of stuff. They have the knowledge graph, they have these big like sections that scroll, and they're answering your questions, so you don't have to go to sites like, what is my IP address anymore. So they're going to continue to do things to keep you on their site.
Cool. And just a last question from me, just going to go over everybody in the panel, starting with Norris. If you had to pick one thing in 2013 that is going to drive results for SEO, what would it be?
One thing that's going to drive results to SEO. Well, I guess it's a pet peeve of mine, and this is something that you might talk about, is the fact that I think a lot of SEO agencies don't use data to back up their claims as far as why you should be targeting this particular keyword, why should we be focus on this piece of content, why we should be pushing X, Y, and Z. It's more of like, okay, well that keyword ranks number 1, we're gonna, that's it. There's nothing to really say, okay, this piece of data, we found out that X amount of Americans within X age group are clicking on this keyword, maybe we should target this for this reason. It's just, okay, we're just gonna do it because common practice says we should do it. So the fact that, I mean, I'm a little biased because I'm in market research, but I feel that SEO should be more of a, not so much, because SEO, I think the biggest problem with SEO, and this is I sometimes see all the time, SEO is ran by a bunch of nerds. No offense, Mike. It's ran by a bunch of nerds and not
rapper, I can't.
and sorry, you can't be a nerd. It's run by a bunch of nerds and not marketers. It's run by a bunch of people who are brilliant, smart, could build you codes with an abacus. There's these smart people, I think, on a different level, but they don't know a thing about marketing an item or a product or marketing to people. But if you tell them about a change in Google's algorithm, oh yeah, it changed this and that third. But how do you market to somebody who's under 18, who's black, who lives in Oklahoma? I don't know that. But Google changed the algorithm last week. So it's like, so my biggest pet peeve about, I guess, SEO in the future is the fact that it should be more based on data-driven results and not just on what this particular person, how they think this particular person is going to search for a keyword per se. That's my nugget.
I think the brands that begin to think about the differences in social networks are going to do really well when they begin to create targeted language and targeted messaging to specific social networks using things like social metadata. I think that's going to become something that people care a lot more about and brands care a lot more about, and that will drive a lot of results.
Cool, Mike?
I think the number one thing you should do to win in search is learn how to tell a story. I mean, it's not about advertising. Like, people look at SEO as an ad channel. That's not what it is. Like, people are trying to discover content. So if you want to win, you have to create the content that is unforgettable, the content that people want to share, they want to link to. Because if you're doing that, like, even if you're not doing the technical part of SEO, you can win just through the sheer fact that people wanted this, they liked it enough to take that action. So telling a story and making the content that people care about is the one thing I would say you should do.
Cool, so data, social, and really the storytelling and great content. Just to add to it, I think authorship will be important too. I think Google is trying to get smarter. So as far as your content strategy and link building portfolio, I think you have to add the authorship into your strategy mix. Just because like Google is really trying to understand who the content is coming from, and those authors, I think it goes above and beyond, guest blog posting. I think it's more than that, but Google is trying to understand, who the author is. So those authors would pass that authorship onto your site and your digital branded ecosystem. All right, guys, amazing panel.